Hi, welcome to the Financial Literacy Fireside Chat series. This is part 4 of a 5-part series where the three of us discuss various topics about personal finance. My name is Alex Namath, and here with me today we have Nicholas Menon, Joel Shackleton. How are you guys doing today?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Pretty good.
Part 4, here we go. Okay, how should we be thinking about debt? It's a loaded question. Who wants to take the first crack at it?
So I think what's probably, this is such a loaded question because it can go on forever. I think before we started recording, I mentioned that we could talk about it for 3 weeks if we wanted to. But it is my opinion that moving forward, our generation and younger generations are going to have to look at debt differently than our past generations did. When I grew up with a boomer parenting basis, they taught me that debt was bad. And that made a lot of sense given the reality that growth in terms of what you were investing in wasn't keeping up with what interest costs were. But in today's day and age, you have to take a longer term perspective on things. And you need to define between good and bad debt. And people that are scared of leverage and debt end up not being able to take advantage of opportunities. So what I want young people to understand is that not all debt is bad. You don't need to pay everything off immediately. But what you need to do is understand the different types of debt. So when I say that not all debt is bad, I want to refer to things like mortgage debt isn't necessarily a terrible thing, so long as you're not buying bad assets. Taking on debt to go to school and better yourself is not a bad thing. Making sure that the investment that you're making is the right one is very, very important when you're taking on debt. But again, make sure you have clear goals with the debt that you're taking on before you take it. When it's a credit card debt and it's yielding 18%, or you have to pay 18% on it on a monthly basis, and you're buying jeans or you're buying a t-shirt or a watch, it's not an appropriate use of debt. But if you're buying something that might return something higher than what the cost of that debt is, it is. And I think a lot of young people struggle with that, or just make poor decisions, or in general struggle to take advantage of situations when they think of it that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about taking debt to purchase things of value, assets, right? Mm-hmm. Buying a pair of jeans isn't something that has value. Well, I mean, to a lot of people, they think it has value.
It'll depreciate very quickly if it has any value.
That's right, yeah. So if, think of it as, I don't know, operating expense versus capital expense, but buying things of value, investments, and using debt to do so is, that's like you mentioned, more of the good debt side, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's become controversial because we look at our governments and we look at from a municipal perspective, provincial perspective, federal perspective. The life of a conservative tends to be, we need to pay them down, when we really need to look at things at a different level. Whereas not all debts are bad. Government should run deficits in a lot of situations. And understanding where those deficits are being run and why is very important to do as well. What's the multiplier effect? And that's one thing that I didn't learn until I was much older, was the multiplier effect. If you look at everything that you're buying or investing in, and it has a high multiplier effect, it can justify borrowing to do it.
So what is that? What do you mean?
Like a multiplier effect would be when you go and you buy jeans, it might produce $8 in income because it's gotten you to work or whatever like that.
Right.
You're participating in life. So having jeans is important, but it's a negative return. So you have it's 0.8 on $100
right.
worth of jeans.
Right.
But then you have an education investment. Let's say you spend $100,000 for rough numbers on education, but it changes your income potential from making $50,000 a year to making $200,000 a year. That's an incredible investment. And where a lot of young people actually mistake when they buy education is they buy an asset that maybe it costs them $50,000 to get an undergraduate degree that only pays them $50,000.
Right.
And that's a poor decision. Or they bought a degree that doesn't even have a job at the end of it.
Right.
And they're upset about it. So having a good multiplier effect is largely determined by the thing that you choose. And education is usually a positive multiplier most of the time. I think and that's always changing, I would say. Like I think in 2014, the result of an engineering degree had a high multiplier effect versus...
Or in certain industries, right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I just want people to think of it that way versus what your parents tell you, like pay down your house as fast as possible.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, all of us parents that had mortgages in the mid to late 80s, where interest rates were, it was very common to find mortgage rates 18, 19%. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely insane. I can't even fathom that.
That would change your entire perspective on debt and mortgages, right? Because you're going to go through the rest of your life thinking, why would I ever want a mortgage? I want to purchase a property in cash because then I don't have to carry all these large interest costs for the life of being in the home, which is going to be many years, hopefully.
Right. So, and then whereas now, I mean, all of us have mortgages now that are sub 2.5% a year. It doesn't make any sense to pay down any faster if you can take money and invest it into U.S. equity markets that will return you average of 7% a year.
Or even just the fact that you have even just inflation, right? Inflation is, if it's maintained at 2% per year, your mortgage rate is really not even much more than that. So it's like, why would you choose not to have a mortgage if that's an option in that transaction?
Right.
Completely agree.
But by the same token, I think people do tend to lump debt into either good or bad, and so you really have to think about each line differently. When you have something like a credit card and you're carrying any balance, that's really always going to be bad debt because there's almost no guaranteed asset class even that will give you 20% per year, 22% per year, which is what you're paying to carry any balance on a credit card. So I think being able to understand how you can use the different sources available to you to limit the amount of high interest debt that you do carry is a thing that a lot of people should be trying to do if you have to carry debt.
Right.
But yeah, it's not all bad.
Yeah, and even with good debt, I mean, something I like to think about is it's one thing to take on debt, but it's another thing to manage it or almost afford it. So cost of capital is the official term, but if you take on debt but you can't service or you're not able to service that debt, so continue to pay the interest on it, the principal that's due on that debt, then you're going to run into trouble. And I think you see that a lot with younger people trying to buy a home, and they're only able to put down 5% of the total value of the home, and then it's okay. So now you own a home, but your mortgage is huge, and and now you have to try to afford this monthly mortgage that's so high because you barely put anything down, and this is obviously cutting into other expense categories that you may have budgeted for prior to having that mortgage. So
it might cut into opportunity as well.
Absolutely.
You're stuck in the city, you're stuck in a certain part of town, you might not be able to take business risk that you may have taken if you didn't have that obligation in terms of mortgage size.
Yeah.
It's incredibly restrictive.
And what if, there's a different conversation, I guess, but and then maybe what happens if the value of your house goes down and you need to sell it?
Yeah, it's you're going to be underwater a lot quicker if you have a very high leverage on something like that.
Right. Yeah. So good and bad debt, but also how much, even for what I would consider good debt for a mortgage, like how much are you actually taking on in terms of debt and how much are you actually putting down? And then for bad debt, I mean, understanding what that debt is being used for, something like a vehicle. I mean, I think that's something that's changed over time, where I feel like owning a vehicle is just part of a monthly expense. No, I'm not talking maintenance, I'm just talking the car payment.
Yeah, that's very common.
Right? And
you're renting the asset almost.
And so even leasing or financing, that's a new norm, I feel like. And before, even growing up, I was almost taught that you always purchase a vehicle with cash, and it makes sense because it's an asset, but it's an asset with that value that goes down over time, right? It depreciates over time. So why would you borrow money that you have to pay interest on to purchase an asset that goes down in value over time? It just doesn't make any sense. So I think it's you have to be responsible when thinking about debt when purchasing something like a vehicle, right?
Well, especially so because specifically with vehicles, if you're going to a dealership, especially, the common question when it comes to affordability is, what can you afford from a monthly payment perspective? Which the correct way to look at debt like that, especially, is you want to know the term, like how long you'll be paying this for, and what the interest rate is, because it really doesn't matter whether the monthly payment's half if you're going to be paying a higher interest rate and for twice the amount of time. And so that's a common trap that I think a lot of people fall into with that type of debt. So it's important to keep those factors in mind with the rate.
You're right, and I think the same thing goes for credit card debt. A lot of people think as long as I can afford the monthly payment, I'm fine. And obviously the credit card company is happy because you're making the monthly payment while paying interest. Your credit score is going to be fantastic. But recently I actually heard someone that they were almost gloating about their son, about how he was able to purchase it. He's able to afford the financing on his vehicle. He got a new vehicle. And I was kind of thinking, well, that's a weird thing to gloat about. Like, you're proud that they can afford the monthly payment on it. It's interesting that that's the focus. It's, can you afford that monthly payment as opposed to understanding the total worth of the asset that you're purchasing, right?
Yeah.
Loaded question, guys.
Yeah.
Lot to
To
talk
work
about.
through it, there's probably a whole lot more.
Right on. That was part 4 of our 5-part series. Stay tuned for part 5.